everyone, and welcome back. If you're here, that means you're ready to dive into part 2 of the Alpha's viral love. First of all, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I'm so excited to continue sharing this story with you. Now, if you haven't seen part 1 yet, no worries. You can pause here, head down to the description, and start from the beginning. I've linked part 1 for a smooth continuation, so you won't miss a thing. Once you've caught up, you can jump right back into this video for part 2. And for those of you who've already watched part 1, welcome back. This is where things get even more exciting, so grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's pick up right where we left off. Without further ado, let's continue the story of the Alpha's viral love. Here's part 2. Chapter 13. Tessa sat cross-legged on the cabin floor, her laptop open in front of her. The glow from the screen illuminated her face as she stared at the paused video of herself from months ago, smiling brightly into the camera. Hey everyone! Today we're talking about 5 simple ways to make your space cozier. Don't forget to like and subscribe! She cringed at her chipper tone. Back then, her biggest worries had been whether the lighting was flattering or if her outfit was Instagram-worthy. Now, her life was one giant chaotic mess involving glowing-eyed werewolves, deadly hunters, and an infuriatingly protective alpha who insisted on treating her like breakable glass. The contrast was stark, almost comical. "You're not that person anymore," she muttered. Clicking pause on the video, her reflection stared back at her from the darkened screen. Tired, determined, and maybe a little scared. But the fear wasn't paralyzing anymore. Danny's voice broke the quiet as he strolled into the cabin, a bag of chips in one hand and a mischievous grin on his face. "You brooding, or is this your pre-battle meditation?" Tessa shot him a look. "I'm reflecting. There's a difference." Sure, Danny said, flopping onto the couch. "Let me guess, you're thinking about Logan, hunters, and how your life's turned into a supernatural rom-com," she snorted. "That about sums it up." Danny held up the bag. "Chip?" "No thanks." "Suit yourself. But if you ask me," he said, crunching loudly, "you're handling this way better than most people would. I mean, you've got hunters on your tail, wolves growling at you, and Logan doing his overprotective, 'I'm the alpha' routine. And you're still here." Tessa leaned back against the wall, her arms resting on her knees. "I don't feel like I'm handling it. I feel like I'm fumbling through it." Danny shrugged. "Welcome to the pack. We're all just fumbling in our own way." She smiled faintly, grateful for his easygoing nature. "Thanks, Danny. I think—" When Danny left, the quiet returned, and Tessa found herself scrolling through her old videos again. Each one felt like a snapshot of a different life, a simpler, safer one. But safe wasn't enough anymore. Her mind replayed the events of the past week: Logan's fierce protection, Lydia's unwavering calm, Danny's humor masking his own fears. And she had to do the same. Her hand hovered over the laptop's keyboard. Then she closed the screen with a decisive snap. "No more sidelines," she said aloud, her voice steady. Logan stood at the edge of the forest, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The weight of his responsibilities pressed heavily on his shoulders. Every decision he made had consequences. For the pack, for their survival, for Tessa, especially Tessa. He clenched his fists, frustration simmering just beneath the surface. Her determination to help was admirable, even maddeningly so, but it put her in danger, and every instinct he had screamed at him to protect her, even from herself. "Brooding again?" Lydia's calm voice interrupted his thoughts as she approached. "I'm strategizing," Logan replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Lydia tilted her head, her knowing gaze cutting through him. "You're conflicted." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's stubborn. She won't back down no matter what I say." "And you admire that about her," Lydia said simply. Logan didn't respond, but the answer was written all over his face. Tessa found Logan near the main cabin, leaning against the railing of the porch. His profile was shadowed in the moonlight, and he looked as though he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Hey," she said, stepping closer. He turned, his amber eyes softening slightly when they landed on her. "Hey." She joined him at the railing, the cool night air brushing against her skin. For a moment they stood in silence, the tension between them unspoken but palpable. "I need to tell you something," Tessa began, her voice steady despite the way her heart raced. Logan turned to face her fully, his expression guarded. "What is it?" "I've decided," she said, meeting his gaze. "I'm done waiting for someone else to fix this. I'm going to confront the hunters." His jaw tightened and the air around him seemed to shift. "No, absolutely not, Logan." "No," he said again, his voice firm. "You don't understand what you're saying. They'll kill you." "Maybe," she admitted, her voice soft but unwavering. "But I can't keep sitting here, letting other people take risks while I hide. If I can do something, anything, to stop this, I have to try." His amber eyes blazed with a mix of anger and something deeper. Fear. "This isn't your fight, Tessa." "It is now," she said. "You said it yourself. I'm part of this whether I like it or not, and I'm not walking away." He took a step closer, his intensity overwhelming. "I can't let you do this." Her breath caught, but she refused to back down. "You can't stop me." For a moment they stood inches apart, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. "You're infuriating," Logan muttered, his voice low. Tessa's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Takes one to know one." The rest of the pack gathered inside the cabin later that night. Tessa stood near the center, her resolve firm despite the weight of their gazes. "I know you don't all trust me," she began, her voice steady. "And I know I've made mistakes. But I'm not here to be a liability. I'm here to help." Kyle crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Tessa met his gaze without flinching. "By going to the hunters and finding out what they want." The room erupted in protests, voices overlapping in a cacophony of objections. "Quiet," Logan barked, his voice cutting through the noise. All eyes turned to him, and he looked at Tessa, his expression unreadable. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," she said firmly. He nodded slowly, though his jaw was tight. "Then we do it on my terms." As the room buzzed with renewed debate, Logan caught Tessa's gaze, his amber eyes blazing with both frustration and reluctant admiration. "You'd better be ready, Tessa, because once we start, there's no turning back." Chapter 14. Tessa sat cross-legged on the floor of the pack's meeting cabin, surrounded by maps, laptops, and the unmistakable tension of a group trying to outthink an enemy that always seemed one step ahead. The pack had gathered around the table, with Logan at the head, his piercing gaze scanning the scattered papers as if sheer willpower could force them to reveal the hunter's secrets. "This is all we have?" Logan asked, his voice low and frustrated. "Jake didn't exactly volunteer his life story," Danny quipped, reclining in his chair with a casualness that Tessa was beginning to recognize as his coping mechanism. "What we got from him is better than nothing." Kyle crossed his arms, his ever-present scowl firmly in place. "Better than nothing? All we have is the location of some abandoned warehouse that might be a hunter base. It's a death trap." "To lead," Lydia countered, her calm voice cutting through the tension. "And it's more than we had yesterday." Tessa cleared her throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the charged silence. "If it is their base, they're not going to leave it undefended. We need to figure out what we're walking into." Kyle rolled his eyes. "And how do you suggest we do that, influencer girl? Vlog our way in?" Heat rushed to Tessa's face, but before she could respond, Danny grinned. "Actually, that's not the worst idea she's had." "What?" Kyle barked, incredulous. Danny leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Think about it. The hunters have been using Tessa's online activity to track us, right? What if we turn the tables, create some bait, lead them to believe we're somewhere we're not, and use the distraction to scout the warehouse?" "That's insane," Kyle snapped. "It's smart," Lydia said, her tone thoughtful. They've been watching her closely. If we can manipulate what they see. Logan's amber eyes flicked to Tessa, assessing. What do you think? She hesitated, the weight of his gaze pressing on her. It could work. I mean, I've spent years figuring out how to grab people's attention online. If we make it convincing enough, they'll buy it. Kyle groaned. We're really taking advice from a vlogger now? You're welcome to contribute something better, Tessa shot back, her tone sharper than she intended. Enough, Logan growled, his voice cutting through the argument like a knife. He turned to Tessa. Walk us through it. Tessa grabbed a notebook and pen, sketching out a rough timeline. Okay, so here's the idea. I post a live update, something that looks like I'm out in the city, miles away from the pack's territory. We time it so they're focused on me while you check out the warehouse. And what happens if they realize it's a setup? Kyle asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. They won't, Tessa said confidently. Not if we do it right. I can make it convincing. Logan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. We'll need to be fast. If this goes south, we can't risk them doubling back on us. Great, Danny said, clapping his hands together. So, when do we start filming, Miss Influencer? Tessa rolled her eyes but couldn't help the small smile tugging at her lips. The cabin buzzed with activity as the pack prepared for the operation. Maps were marked, supplies were gathered, and Tessa found herself caught between excitement and nerves as she set up her equipment. Logan appeared beside her, his presence as steadying as it was distracting. You've done this before? Faked a live stream to distract murderous hunters? Not exactly, she said with a wry smile. But I've done enough editing tricks to make it look real. His lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him in days. I trust you. The simple statement sent warmth flooding through her chest. Thanks, she said softly. For a moment they stood there, the noise of the cabin fading into the background. Tessa opened her mouth to say something. What, she wasn't sure, but Kyle's voice interrupted them. Lovebirds, we've got work to do, he called, smirking from across the room. Logan's expression darkened, and he shot Kyle a look that could have frozen fire. Tessa stifled a laugh. The plan was set in motion. Tessa recorded her decoy video, using clever angles and carefully timed audio cues to create the illusion of being in the city. She uploaded it with a few keystrokes, her heart pounding as the progress bar inched toward completion. Once it's live, they'll take the bait, she said, stepping back from the laptop. Logan stood at her side, his focus unwavering. And we'll be ready. The group moved silently through the woods, the tension thick as they approached the warehouse Jake had described. Logan led the way, his wolf senses on high alert, while Tessa stayed close to Danny and Lydia. Remind me again why I volunteered for this, Danny muttered under his breath. Because you're the best beta in the pack, Tessa teased, keeping her voice low. He grinned. Damn right! Lydia shushed them, her sharp gaze scanning the building ahead. Agna, she whispered, pointing to a faint glow coming from one of the upper windows. Logan nodded, signaling for the group to spread out. Tessa stayed with Danny, her heart pounding as they crept closer. The warehouse loomed like a sleeping beast, its rusted exterior and shattered windows giving it an air of menace. Why do bad guys always pick creepy abandoned places? She whispered. Danny, aesthetic, probably. Inside, the warehouse was eerily quiet. Logan and Lydia moved ahead, their footsteps silent on the concrete floor. Tessa and Danny hung back, keeping watch near the entrance. Do you think they're here? Tessa asked, her voice barely audible. Danny's eyes darted around the space, his easygoing demeanor replaced by sharp focus. If they're not, they've been recently. Smells like gunpowder and fear in here. Great, she muttered. Two of my least favorite things. Suddenly a faint noise echoed from deeper within the building, a metallic clink, followed by hurried footsteps. Logan appeared out of the shadows, his expression grim. They're here, he said. We need to move. As the group regrouped outside, the tension between them was palpable. They've been using this place to stage their attacks, Lydia said, holding up a set of blueprints she'd found inside. "They're planning something big." "We'll stop them," Logan said firmly, his amber eyes blazing. Tessa stepped forward, her resolve solidifying. "Then I'm in." Logan turned to her, his jaw tightening. "This isn't your fight." "It is now," she said, meeting his gaze head-on. For a moment they stared at each other, the weight of everything unspoken passing between them. Finally Logan nodded. "All right," he said, "but we do this together." As the group prepared to move out, Tessa caught Logan's arm. "I'll do whatever it takes to stop them," she said softly. His gaze softened, and for the first time he allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "I know." Chapter 15. Tessa crouched behind a rusted-out car, the cold metal pressing against her back. Her phone was clutched tightly in her hand, her thumb hovering over the Go Live button. Across the lot, the hunter's base loomed like a sinister shadow against the moonlit sky, an industrial building that looked as if it had been abandoned years ago but was now buzzing with activity. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered, glancing over at Danny, who was crouched next to her. Danny grinned, his teeth flashing white in the dark. "Relax, it's a moderately terrible idea, big difference." Tessa gave him a flat look. "That's not reassuring." "Just do your thing, Miss Influencer," Danny said, nudging her shoulder lightly. "You've got this." She inhaled deeply, forcing herself to focus. The plan was simple, for as simple as anything involving hunters, werewolves, and life or math stakes could be, her job was to create a distraction, something loud and attention-grabbing to pull the hunters away from the base. Logan, Lydia, and Danny would use the chaos to slip inside and gather intel. It sounded great on paper, but now, with her heart hammering in her chest and every instinct screaming at her to run, Tessa wasn't so sure. She glanced toward the shadows where Logan stood, his figure barely visible. He gave her a curt nod, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It wasn't much, but it steadied her. "Okay," she muttered to herself, raising her phone. Showtime. The live stream started with a jolt as Tessa hit the button, her face filling the screen. "Hey everyone," she said, injecting a bright, slightly manic energy into her voice. "It's your girl Tessa Lane, coming at you with an impromptu midnight adventure." She tilted the phone, panning it over the desolate parking lot and the faint glow of the hunter's base in the distance. "Now, I know what you're thinking," she continued, keeping her tone light. "What's a lifestyle vlogger doing out here in the middle of nowhere? Well, I heard some rumors about this place, and you know me, I couldn't resist checking it out." The chat exploded almost instantly. "Tessa, what are you doing?" "This is so sketchy! Get out of there!" She grinned at the screen, though her hands were shaking. "Don't worry, guys. I've got this. But seriously, if I disappear, someone call the authorities." In the distance, she heard the sound of footsteps and muffled voices. The hunters had noticed. "All right," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the stream. "Time to move." She slipped out from behind the car, keeping the camera pointed at the base. Her goal was to stay visible just long enough to lure the hunters away, but not so long that they caught her. Easy, right? Meanwhile, inside the base, Logan and Lydia moved with practiced stealth, their senses sharp as they navigated the dimly lit corridors. Danny followed close behind, his usual humor replaced with quiet focus. They stopped in front of a locked door, the faint hum of machinery audible from the other side. "This is it," Lydia murmured, pulling out a set of tools. Logan kept watch as Lydia worked, his ears straining for any sound of approaching footsteps. Tessa's distraction was working so far, but he couldn't shake the gnawing worry in his gut. The door clicked open, and Lydia pushed it ajar. Inside, rows of monitors lined the walls, each screen displaying maps, photos, and surveillance footage. Danny let out a low whistle. "Looks like someone's been busy." Logan's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer to the screens. One monitor showed a map of the pack's territory, complete with marked locations and notes. Another displayed grainy footage of wolves in mid-shift, their forms caught between human and animal. "They're gathering proof," Lydia said, her voice grim. They're planning to expose us." "Not if we stop them," Logan growled. Outside, Tessa's nerves were fraying. The hunters were getting closer, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. "Okay, folks," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I think it's time to wrap this up. Don't forget to like and subscribe." Her foot caught on a piece of debris, and she stumbled, the phone flying out of her hand. "Crap!" she hissed, scrambling to retrieve it. One of the hunters spotted her, his flashlight beam landing squarely on her. "Hey, over here!" he shouted. Tessa's heart lurched as she grabbed the phone and bolted, ducking behind a stack of crates. "Think, Tessa," she muttered, her breath coming in short gasps. "Think." She glanced down at her phone, her mind racing. An idea sparked. Risky and completely ridiculous, but it might just work. Inside the base, Logan's head snapped up at the sound of a distant commotion. "Tessa?" he muttered, a mix of worry and frustration in his voice. "She'll be fine," Danny said, though the uncertainty in his tone was impossible to miss. Logan growled low in his throat but forced himself to focus. They had found what they needed. Now it was time to get out. "Let's move," he said, his tone brooking no argument. Tessa crouched behind the crates, her fingers flying across her phone screen. With a few quick swipes, she uploaded a pre-recorded video to her channel, one that made it look like she was broadcasting from a completely different location. The hunters' radios crackled as the false livestream appeared on their feeds. "She's not here," one of them shouted. Tessa held her breath as they moved away, their footsteps fading into the distance. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. A shadow loomed over her, and she turned to find one remaining hunter standing a few feet away, his weapon trained on her. "Nice try," he sneered. Before he could take another step, a low growl rumbled from the darkness. Logan emerged from the shadows, his wolf form bristling with fury. The hunter hesitated, his confidence faltering. "Big mistake," Danny said from behind him, his grin sharp and predatory. The hunter dropped his weapon and bolted, disappearing into the night. Tessa exhaled shakily as Logan shifted back to human form, his amber eyes burning with both anger and relief. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough. "Okay," she replied, managing a weak smile. Logan's lips twitched, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. "That was reckless." "It worked, didn't it?" He shook his head, a mixture of exasperation and admiration in his expression. "You're impossible." "And you're welcome," she shot back, though her voice softened. "Thanks for the save." As the group regrouped outside the base, Lydia held up a flash drive she had taken from the control room. "This has everything we need. Their plans, their communications, everything." Logan nodded, his gaze sweeping over the pack. "Good work. Let's get out of here." But just as they turned to leave, a voice echoed through the lot, stopping them in their tracks. "Well, well. Look who's still playing hero." Logan stiffened, his body coiled with tension as a man stepped into view. He was tall and lean, with sharp features and an air of calculated menace. "Victor," Logan growled, his tone venomous. The man smirked, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. "Miss me?" Tessa glanced between Logan and Victor, the weight of their shared history palpable in the charged silence. "Who is he?" she whispered. Logan's jaw clenched, his voice a low snarl. "The reason they're hunting us." Chapter 16. The air crackled with anticipation as Logan addressed the pack. They had gathered in the clearing just before dawn, the faint light painting their tense faces in shades of gray. Tessa stood to the side, clutching a flashlight she didn't need but couldn't seem to let go of, her heart pounding like a drumline. "This is it," Logan said, his voice steady despite the storm she knew was brewing inside him. "We have their plans, their communications, and their weaknesses. Tonight we hit them where it hurts." Danny, standing at Logan's right, added with a grin. "And if we're lucky, we'll leave them crying into their tactical vests." A few chuckles rippled through the group, but the tension remained thick. Logan's gaze swept over the pack, landing briefly on Tessa. "Stay focused, watch each other's backs, and remember, This isn't about revenge. It's about survival. Tessa swallowed hard as the group dispersed to prepare. She felt Logan's presence beside her before he spoke. "You don't have to come," he said, his tone softer than it had been all morning. She turned to him, lifting her chin. "I'm not sitting this one out, you know." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Stick close to Danny. And Tessa." "Yeah?" His amber eyes locked onto hers, the intensity of his gaze sending a shiver down her spine. "Be careful." The hunter's facility loomed ahead, a stark industrial building surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The pack moved in silence, shadows blending into shadows as they approached. "Looks like a scene from a bad spy movie," Tessa whispered to Danny as they crouched near the perimeter. Danny grinned. "You're not wrong. All we're missing is the evil villain monologue." "Focus," Logan growled from the front, though there was no real bite to his tone. Tessa bit back a smile as Danny rolled his eyes dramatically. The first wave of the plan went smoothly. Lydia and 2 other wolves disabled the facility's power, plunging it into darkness. Tessa watched as Logan led the main group inside, his movements precise and confident. Danny nudged her. "Ready for some fun?" "If by fun you mean sheer terror, then absolutely," she quipped, gripping the small canister of smoke bombs she'd been tasked with using as a diversion. They slipped through the broken fence, staying low as they moved toward the building. Tessa's heart raced as they approached the main entrance, where 2 guards stood, their flashlights cutting through the dark. "Showtime," Danny whispered, motioning for her to throw the first bomb. Tessa took a deep breath, her fingers fumbling slightly as she activated the canister and hurled it toward the guards. A hiss filled the air as smoke erupted, thick and disorienting. The guards shouted, their beams slicing through the cloud uselessly. "Nice throw," Danny said, as they darted past the confusion and into the building. Inside, chaos reigned. The pack clashed with hunters in the dimly lit hallways, the sounds of snarls and shouts echoing off the metal walls. Tessa stayed close to Danny, her pulse hammering in her ears as she tried to keep up. They turned a corner and nearly collided with a hunter armed with a cattle prod. "Get down!" Danny shouted, pushing Tessa aside as the weapon crackled to life. The hunter swung, but Danny shifted mid-measure, his wolf form colliding with the man and sending him sprawling. Tessa scrambled to her feet, her hands trembling as she grabbed a nearby wrench and swung it at another hunter who appeared behind Danny. The man stumbled, giving Danny enough time to take him down. "You okay?" Danny asked, shifting back to human form as he clutched his arm, blood dripping from a gash on his shoulder. "You're the one bleeding," Tessa shot back, panic threading her voice. Danny grinned despite the pain. "Comes with the territory." "Not funny," she muttered, grabbing a strip of fabric from her jacket to press against the wound. "Hey," he said, his voice softening. "You did good back there. Now, let's finish this." In another part of the facility, Logan and Lydia uncovered what they had been searching for, a room filled with crates of weapons, documents, and tech that confirmed the hunters' plans to expose the existence of werewolves to the world. "They're planning a broadcast," Lydia said, scanning a sheet of paper. "They've got evidence, footage, they're ready to go public." Logan's jaw clenched as he took in the scale of the operation. "Not if we burn this place to the ground." Tessa and Danny joined Logan just as he was barking orders to the others. The sight of Danny's injury made Logan's eyes flash with anger. "What happened?" he demanded. "Relax, boss," Danny said. "It's a scratch." Logan turned to Tessa, his gaze softening. "You okay?" "Fine," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. He reached out, his hand brushing hers briefly. "You did good." The simple praise made her chest tighten. As the pack worked to destroy the hunters' equipment, the sound of approaching vehicles sent a jolt of fear through the group. "They're back," Lydia said, her tone grim. "Fall back," Logan ordered, his voice cutting through the rising panic. The pack moved quickly, but the hunters were relentless. Shots rang out as the group retreated, the air thick with smoke and fear. Tessa stayed close to Logan, her heart in her throat as they dodged through the chaos. They barely made it out, the facility engulfed in flames behind them. The pack regrouped in the forest, their faces drawn and weary. Tessa leaned against a tree, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Danny sat nearby, clutching his shoulder as Lydia tended to his wound. Logan approached her, his expression unreadable. "You did good tonight," he said. She looked up at him, her fear and exhaustion giving way to a flicker of pride. "We all did." For a moment they stood in silence, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger. The moment was shattered by the sound of a radio crackling to life. One of the pack members held it up, their face pale as a voice filled the air. "You think this is over?" the voice taunted. "We're just getting started." Chapter 17. The acrid smell of smoke lingered in the air, stinging Tessa's eyes as she stood in the clearing that used to be the pack's sanctuary. The charred remnants of the cabins looked almost skeletal, twisted beams jutting into the sky like broken ribs. The silence was deafening. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the faint crackle of dying embers. Her heart twisted painfully as she glanced around at the pack. Their usual energy and unity were gone, replaced by stunned expressions and lowered heads. Danny leaned heavily against a tree, his arms still bandaged from their earlier mission. Lydia knelt beside him, murmuring reassurances that even Tessa could tell were half-hearted. And Logan stood in the center of the clearing, staring at the wreckage, with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His amber eyes blazed with anger and something deeper, guilt. Tessa hesitated, unsure whether to approach him. He looked like a man on the edge of a precipice, barely holding it together. "I should have seen this coming," Logan said suddenly, his voice cutting through the heavy air. The pack turned to him, their silence expectant and uneasy. "This is on me," he continued, his fists clenching at his sides. "I knew the hunters were escalating, and I didn't move fast enough to protect us." "That's not fair," Lydia said softly, rising to her feet. "You couldn't have known." "It's my job to know," Logan snapped, his tone sharper than intended. He raked a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. "I'm the alpha. This is my responsibility." Tessa couldn't stay silent any longer. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "This isn't just on you, Logan. We all knew the risks. We're in this together." His gaze snapped to hers, a mix of anger and something unreadable flashing in his eyes. "Together?" he echoed bitterly. "You don't get it, Tessa. You're not the one they're hunting." Her cheeks burned at the pointed reminder, but she refused to back down. "You think I don't feel responsible? That I don't know what's at stake? I've been trying to help." "And look where that's gotten us," Kyle cut in, his voice cold. Tessa's stomach dropped as the rest of the pack muttered their agreement. "She's right," Lydia interjected, her tone firm. We're all in this. Blaming each other won't change what's happened." Logan didn't respond, his jaw tightening as he turned away. Later, as the pack began salvaging what little they could from the wreckage, Tessa sat on a fallen log, picking absently at the frayed edge of her jacket. Danny plopped down beside her, wincing slightly. "Fun day, huh?" he said, his tone light despite the heavy atmosphere. Tessa managed a weak smile. "It's a real contender for worst day ever." He nudged her shoulder. "For what it's worth, you're doing fine. Don't let Kyle's grumpy alpha wannabe vibes get to you." "Thanks, Danny," she said, her smile growing slightly. His grin faded as he glanced around the clearing. "We'll bounce back, we always do. But man, this one hurts." Logan stood apart from the group, his hands on his hips as he surveyed the damage. Every shattered beam, every pile of ash felt like a personal failure. He'd been so focused on offense, on taking the fight to the hunters, that he hadn't considered how vulnerable their sanctuary had become. "You need to stop blaming yourself," Lydia said quietly, appearing at his side. "How can I not?" Logan said, his voice rough. "Because you're no good to the pack like this," she replied, her tone gentle but unyielding. "They need their alpha." not a martyr. Logan exhaled sharply, his eyes flicking to Tessa. She was talking to Danny, her expression tinged with guilt, despite the faint smile on her lips. "She doesn't belong here," he muttered. Lydia arched a brow. "Are you sure about that? Or are you just afraid of what happens if she does?" Logan didn't answer. That night, the pack gathered around a makeshift fire. The once strong group looked ragged and frayed, their usual camaraderie replaced with quiet tension. Danny, ever the optimist, tried to inject some humor into the conversation. "Well, on the bright side, I don't have to clean my cabin anymore. Perks of it being ash." A few half-hearted chuckles followed, but the mood remained heavy. Tessa sat on the edge of the group, feeling the weight of the pack's mistrust pressing down on her. She glanced at Logan, who was staring into the fire with a distant expression. She wanted to say something, to reach out to him, but the words wouldn't come. Suddenly, one of the younger wolves rushed into the clearing, clutching a piece of equipment they'd salvaged from the wreckage. "I found this in the rubble," he said breathlessly, holding up a device that looked like a cross between a tablet and a weapon. "It's counterattack." Logan took the device, his brow furrowing as he examined it. Lydia leaned over his shoulder, her expression darkening. "This is advanced," she said. "They've been developing weapons specifically designed to counter us." Logan's jaw clenched. "How long before they bring this to the next fight?" "Not long," Lydia replied grimly. As the group processed the implications, the device crackled to life, a distorted voice filling the clearing. "Enjoying the fireworks?" the voice taunted. Tessa's blood ran cold as the pack gathered around the device. "You can't hide forever," the voice continued. "The world deserves to know the truth about your kind, and soon they will." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the group in stunned silence. "They are planning to go public," Lydia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan's eyes glinted with determination as he looked at the pack. "Not if we stop them." Tessa stepped closer to Logan, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through. "What's the plan?" Logan met her gaze, the weight of their situation reflected in his eyes. "We fight." Chapter 18. The tension in the air was suffocating. Tessa watched from a distance as Logan stood in the center of the clearing, holding a stack of papers the young wolf Callum had handed him. His face was unreadable, but the way his shoulders tensed told her everything she needed to know. Whatever was on those papers wasn't good. "What is it?" Lydia asked, stepping forward, her usually calm voice edged with worry. Logan didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed her the documents, his amber eyes burning with barely restrained fury. Tessa moved closer, her heart thudding as she caught a glimpse of the top page. A yellowed newspaper clipping with a grainy photo of Logan and a younger version of Denny standing in front of a gutted cabin. After the incident with the Silverwood pack. "What incident?" Tessa asked, her voice tentative. Logan's jaw worked as he looked away, his expression dark. "A territory dispute. The Silverwood pack was encroaching on our land, threatening the balance. Things escalated." "Escalated how?" Tessa pressed, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Logan met her gaze, his eyes heavy with guilt. "We fought, and people died." The weight of his words hung in the air. "These hunters," Lydia said, holding up the papers, "they're connected to the Silverwood pack, relatives of those who were killed." "Revenge," Danny muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's always about revenge." "They're not just after us because we're werewolves," Logan said bitterly. "They're after me. This is personal." Tessa's thoughts raced as the pack absorbed the revelation. Revenge. It wasn't some faceless war. This was about Logan, his choices, and a past he clearly hadn't fully escaped. But the unease gnawing at her grew sharper when Callum stepped forward, hesitating before speaking. "There's more," he said, glancing nervously at Tessa. "I found something else." "What is it?" Logan asked, his voice low and dangerous. Callum handed him another paper, this one newer and less weathered. Logan's eyes scanned the page, his face hardening with each line. He passed it to Tessa without a word. Her breath caught as she read the first few sentences. It was an old email thread between hunters, referencing her last name. "No," she whispered, shaking her head as she read further. Her family. Her father's name, tied to a group of hunters. "This can't be right," she said, her voice cracking. "Tessa," Logan said, his tone cautious but firm. "No," she said louder, backing away. "My family had nothing to do with this. They wouldn't. Are you sure?" Kyle's sharp voice cut in, his tone accusing. "Because ever since she showed up, things have only gotten worse." "That's enough," Logan growled, his amber eyes flashing. "Is it?" Kyle shot back, stepping forward. "You said it yourself. This is personal. And now we find out her family might be involved? How do we know she's not a plant?" Tessa's stomach churned. "I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling. "Convenient?" Kyle sneered. "Stop it," Lydia said sharply, stepping between them. "This isn't helping." "Logan, you need to decide where your loyalties lie," Kyle continued, ignoring Lydia. "With us or with her?" The pack fractured before Tessa's eyes. Some members stood with Kyle, their doubt and anger clear in their faces. Others gravitated toward Lydia and Danny, their loyalty to Logan outweighing their mistrust of her. Tessa wanted to disappear, she wanted to scream, but most of all she wanted to prove that she wasn't the enemy. "Enough!" Logan's voice rang out, silencing the arguments. His gaze swept over the group, his authority unmistakable. "I make the decisions here. And Tessa is staying." The pack grumbled, but didn't argue further, though Kyle's glare was unmistakably venomous. Later, as the pack dispersed to lick their wounds and regroup, Tessa sat on the edge of the clearing, staring into the distance. The paper with her family's name felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. She didn't hear Logan approach until he sat beside her, his presence grounding and suffocating all at once. "Talk to me," he said quietly. She let out a bitter laugh. "What do you want me to say? That I knew? That I'm some kind of spy?" "Tessa," Logan said, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't believe that, and neither do I." She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. "They're right to blame me. Ever since I showed up, it's been one disaster after another. And now this?" She pulled the paper from her pocket, crumpling it in her hand. "What if they're right? What if my family is the reason they're hunting you?" Logan turned toward her, his gaze intense. "You didn't choose this, Tessa. And whatever your family did, or didn't do, it doesn't change the fact that you've been fighting for us. For me." Her breath hitched. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." "Yes, you are," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're stronger than you think, and I trust you. That's all that matters." His words washed over her, steadying the storm inside her. The quiet moment was shattered when a howl echoed through the clearing, urgent and full of warning. Logan shot to his feet, his instincts kicking in instantly. Tessa followed, her heart racing. Danny appeared moments later, his usual humor gone. "We've got a problem," he said grimly, holding up a small device. "What is it?" Logan asked. Danny pressed a button and a distorted voice filled the air. "Logan Kane," the voice said, cold and calculated. "You have 24 hours to surrender yourself and your pack. If you don't, we'll make sure the world knows exactly what you are." The message ended abruptly, leaving the group in stunned silence. "They're bluffing," Kyle said, though his tone lacked conviction. "They're not," Logan said, his expression hard. He turned to the pack, his voice strong despite the weight of the ultimatum. "We don't back down, not now." Tessa stepped forward, meeting Logan's gaze with a newfound determination. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Chapter 19. The clearing felt like a battlefield after the war. The pack lingered in small groups, their conversations hushed and heavy with mistrust. No one dared say what they were all thinking, that the hunters' ultimatum was tearing them apart as effectively as their weapons had destroyed the sanctuary. Tessa stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the fractured pack from a distance. Every word of blame, every distrustful glance, replayed in her mind like a broken record. "This is my fault," she whispered to herself, the words bitter and raw. Logan had disappeared hours ago, retreating to the dense forest where no one dared follow. Danny had tried to brush it off, saying he just needs some space, but Tessa knew better. Logan wasn't just brooding, he was breaking. The pack had been his responsibility, his family. Now their sanctuary was gone, and the bonds that once held them together were fraying. Logan carried it all, every failure, every loss. She kicked at a fallen branch, the frustration and guilt bubbling inside her like a storm she couldn't contain. "You're going to hurt yourself if you keep doing that," Danny's voice said behind her. Tessa turned to find him leaning against a tree, his expression softer than usual. "I'm fine," she muttered. "You're not fine," he said, walking closer. "None of us are. Thanks for the pep talk, Danny. Really inspiring." Danny smirked faintly, but the humor didn't reach his eyes. "Look, I know things are bad right now, but blaming yourself isn't going to help." "It's not just blame," Tessa said, her voice cracking. "It's the truth. If I hadn't gotten involved—" "You can't control what the hunters do," Danny interrupted, his tone unusually sharp. "And trust me, they'd still be coming for us even if you'd never crossed paths with Logan." She looked away, her throat tightening. "I don't know how to fix this." Danny sighed, his usual carefree demeanor slipping. "Neither do I. But I do know Logan needs you right now." Tessa frowned. "He doesn't even want to look at me." "Doesn't mean he doesn't need you," Danny said, his voice softer. "Go find him." It didn't take long to track Logan down. She found him at the edge of a ridge overlooking the forest, sitting on a fallen log with his head in his hands. The faint glow of moonlight caught the edges of his face, highlighting the exhaustion and pain etched into his features. "Logan?" she said quietly. He didn't look up. "Not now, Tessa." She ignored the warning in his tone and stepped closer. "You can't keep doing this, pushing everyone away. Maybe they'd be better off without me," he said, his voice hollow. Tessa's chest tightened. "You don't believe that." "Don't I?" Logan stood abruptly, his movements sharp and restless. "I've failed them. I've failed everyone, and now the hunter's closer than ever. This is on me." "It's not just on you," she said, her frustration rising. "You keep acting like you have to do this alone, but you don't. You have a pack, people who care about you, who trust you." Logan turned to her, his amber eyes blazing with a mix of anger and despair. "They don't trust me. Not anymore. They're questioning everything I've done, and maybe they're right." "Logan," she said, her voice softer now, "you're not perfect. No one is. But you've done everything you can to protect them." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned and walked deeper into the forest, leaving her standing alone. When Tessa returned to the clearing, the tension had only worsened. Lydia was trying to calm an argument between Kyle and another pack member, their voices rising as they debated Logan's leadership. "He's lost it," Kyle said angrily. "We need someone who can actually protect us." "And you think you can do better?" Lydia shot back, her tone sharp. "At least I wouldn't lead us into a trap." Tessa clenched her fists, anger and helplessness swirling inside. She wanted to scream, to shake them and remind them that fighting each other wasn't the answer, but the words caught in her throat. Then came the sound of a gunshot in the distance, sharp and unmistakable. The clearing went silent, every wolf tensing as the sound echoed through the trees. Danny was the first to speak. "That came from the perimeter." Logan emerged from the forest moments later, his face grim. "Hunters." The pack moved quickly, splitting into groups to defend their territory. Tessa stayed close to Lydia and Danny, her heart pounding as they made their way toward the source of the noise. The scene they stumbled upon was worse than she'd imagined. One of the younger wolves, barely more than a teenager, lay motionless on the ground, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. Another pack member knelt beside him, his hands shaking as he tried to stop the bleeding. Lydia rushed forward, her calm demeanor slipping as she assessed the situation. "He's gone," she said quietly, her voice thick with grief. Tessa's stomach turned. She barely registered the sounds of the others, the snarls, the shouts, the heavy thud of fists and weapons. All she could see was the young wolf's lifeless face. By the time the pack regrouped, the hunters had vanished, leaving behind only destruction and pain. Logan stood apart from the group, his expression a mask of controlled fury. Tessa approached him hesitantly, her throat tight with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, his eyes haunted. "Don't be. This is on me." Before she could respond, Lydia approached, holding something in her hands. It was a small, weathered journal, its leather cover scuffed with age. "I found this in the rubble of your cabin," Lydia said, handing it to Logan. He hesitated before taking it, his expression softening as he opened the journal and flipped through the pages. What is it?" Tessa asked. Logan's lips pressed into a thin line. "It belonged to my father." Later that night, when the pack had settled into a tense, uneasy silence, Tessa found the journal where Logan had left it. She hesitated before picking it up, her curiosity outweighing her hesitation. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, sketches, and entries that painted a picture of a man trying to protect his family and his pack. One entry caught her attention. "Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about standing tall when everything else falls apart. It's about showing your pack that even in the darkest moments, there's still a way forward." Tessa closed the journal, her chest tightening. Logan had inherited more than his father's responsibilities. He'd inherited his guilt, his self-doubt, his relentless need to carry the weight of the world alone. But he wasn't alone. Tessa clutched the journal to her chest, her resolve hardening. Logan might not believe in himself right now, but she would. And she'd fight for him, for all of them, no matter what it took. Chapter 20. The forest was still and quiet, the air thick with unspoken tension. Logan stood at the edge of the clearing, staring out at the faint glow of the moon above the treetops. His father's journal sat heavy in his hands, its pages whispering truths he wasn't ready to face. "You've been standing there so long, I'm starting to wonder if you've gone feral," Danny's voice called out from behind him. Logan sighed, his grip tightening on the journal. "Not now, Danny." Danny ignored him, strolling up to lean against a nearby tree. His casual posture didn't mask the worry in his eyes. "You know, brooding doesn't suit you. You're more the growl and punch something type." "Danny," Logan growled, the sound low and warning. "See? That's the Logan I know." Danny's grin faded as he stepped closer. "Listen, I get it. You feel like everything's on you. The pack, Tessa, all of this. But you need to cut that crap out." Logan turned, his eyes flashing. "You don't get it." "I get more than you think," Danny interrupted, his voice unusually firm. "I've been with you every step of the way. I've seen how much you've sacrificed, but guess what? You're not doing this alone. You've got us. And whether you believe it or not, we still believe in you." Logan's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the journal. "What if I let them down again?" "You won't," Danny said simply, "because you're Logan Kane. And if there's one thing you don't do, it's quit." The tension between them eased, and Logan gave a slight nod. "Thanks, Danny." Danny smirked. "Don't mention it. Seriously, though, don't. I have a reputation to maintain." Logan's lips twitched in a faint smile as Danny turned to leave. Back in the clearing, Tessa paced nervously, rehearsing the speech she'd been piecing together since she found Logan's journal. "You're stronger than you think," she muttered to herself. "No, that's too cliché. Maybe, we need you, Logan, more than ever. Ugh, too dramatic." "Tessa," Lydia's voice interrupted her thoughts. Tessa turned to see Lydia watching her with a small, knowing smile. "You've got this," Lydia said, squeezing her arm gently. Tessa exhaled and nodded. "Here goes nothing." Logan was still at the edge of the clearing when Tessa approached, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mind some company?" she asked tentatively. He glanced at her and nodded. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of the last few days hanging between them. "I found your father's journal," Tessa said softly. Logan tensed but didn't respond. "I wasn't snooping," she added quickly. "Lydia showed it to me." His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he finally turned to face her. "What did you think?" "I think he was a lot like you," she said, meeting his gaze. "He wanted to protect everyone, even when it meant carrying the weight alone." Logan's throat worked as he swallowed. "He was a good alpha." "So are you," Tessa said firmly. He let out a humorless laugh. "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it for you," she shot back, her voice rising. "I'm saying it because it's true. Logan, I've seen the way the pack looks at you. Even when things are falling apart, they trust you to put them back together." "And what if I can't?" he asked, his voice raw. "Then we'll figure it out together," Tessa said, stepping closer. "Because you're not doing this alone. Not anymore." His amber eyes searched hers, and for a moment, the walls he'd built around himself seemed to crack. "Why are you still here?" he asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "Because I believe in you, and because I'm too stubborn to leave." As dawn broke, the pack gathered once again. The mood was still somber, but there was a spark of hope in the air, a glimmer of determination that hadn't been there before. Logan stood at the center, his usual commanding presence returning. "We've been hit hard, but we're not done. The hunters want to take us down, and they think they've won. But they don't know who they're dealing with." The pack murmured in agreement, their spirits lifting. "We have one chance to turn this around," Logan continued. "We're going to hit them where it hurts. Their base, their weapons, everything they've built to destroy us." "And how are we supposed to do that?" Kyle asked skeptically. Logan looked to Tessa, nodding for her to step forward. "We use their tools against them," Tessa said, holding up the salvaged hunter device. "I've been studying their tech, and I think we can disrupt their systems. Turn off their surveillance, scramble their communications. It won't be easy, but it's doable. And while they're blind," Logan added, "we strike." The pack exchanged glances, their doubts easing as the plan began to take shape. Hours later, as the group prepared, Tessa found herself next to Lydia, who was examining a strange, glowing crystal. "What's that?" Tessa asked, curious. Lydia smiled. "Something from the old days. It's called moonstone. My grandmother used it for protection spells. It might not stop a bullet, but it'll give us an edge." "Why haven't we used it before?" "It's rare and hard to activate," Lydia explained, "but desperate times." Tessa nodded, her hope growing. As the pack gathered their weapons and tools, Logan held up the moonstone, its faint glow reflecting in his amber eyes. "This is our chance," he said. "We fight together, and we win." Chapter 21. The pack moved with quiet determination through the forest, the weight of their mission settling heavily on their shoulders. Tessa adjusted the straps of the backpack loaded with tools and tech, trying to ignore the steady thrum of nerves in her chest. "All right," Danny said from his spot beside her. "Time for my pre-battle pep talk. Rule number 1, don't die. Rule number 2, if you see me fighting someone twice my size, jump in and make me look good." "Noted," Tessa said dryly, though she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. Logan's voice carried back to them from the front of the group. "Danny, stop distracting her." "Relax, Alpha," Danny replied with a smirk, "just keeping morale up." Tessa glanced at Logan, his broad shoulders tense as he led the pack. She could see the weight he carried, the responsibility, the fear of failure. And beneath it all, the fierce determination to protect them. At any cost. As they approached the edge of the hunter's stronghold, Tessa pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "What are you doing?" Lydia asked, crouching beside her. "Setting up the distraction," Tessa said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. She hit post, and within seconds her phone lit up with notifications. The pre-recorded video she'd created, a cheerful vlog announcing her adventure into the mysterious wilderness, was already gaining traction. "Let's hope they're as glued to their screens as my followers," Tessa murmured. Danny peered over her shoulder. "You've got like 50 people already asking where you are. That's terrifying." Tessa grinned. "Welcome to the internet." Inside the stronghold, the hunters were already taking the bait. Alerts pinged on their monitors as comments poured in, speculating on Tessa's location and intentions. "She's broadcasting again," one of the hunters said, his tone tense. "Tracker," another ordered. "She could lead us straight to them." They didn't notice the shadows creeping closer to their perimeter. "Go," Logan whispered, his voice a command that sent the pack into motion. Tessa stayed close to him as they slipped past the outer defenses. She marveled at how seamlessly the pack moved together, their unity a stark contrast to the chaos that had threatened to tear them apart just days ago. As they reached the first checkpoint, a pair of hunters emerged, their weapons at the ready. Danny shifted instantly, his wolf form a blur of fur and teeth as he took one down. Logan dispatched the other with a swift, brutal efficiency that made Tessa's heart lurch. "Clear," Logan said, his voice calm despite the tension in the air. Tessa nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she deactivated the security cameras with a device she'd rigged from salvaged hunter tech. "Nice work," Lydia murmured, her tone approving. "Thanks," Tessa said, her voice steadier than she felt. The deeper they moved into the stronghold, the harder the resistance became. More hunters appeared, their weapons flashing in the dim light. The air was thick with the sounds of snarls, shouts, and the clash of metal and claws. Tessa stayed low, using every ounce of her wits and speed to keep up. At one point, a hunter lunged at her, and she swung a wrench with all her might, the impact sending the man sprawling. "Impressive," Logan said, appearing at her side and dispatching another hunter with a quick, precise strike. "Thanks," she panted, adrenaline surging through her. He caught her gaze, his amber eyes intense. "Stay close to me." She nodded, feeling a flicker of warmth beneath the chaos. As they reached the main control room, the pack regrouped. Logan motioned for silence, his eyes scanning the area. "This is it," he said quietly. "Tessa, you're up." She swallowed hard but didn't hesitate. Moving to the control panel, she plugged in her phone, her fingers flying as she uploaded the program she'd designed to scramble the hunter's systems. "Almost there," she murmured, her pulse racing. "Hurry," Logan said, his voice low but urgent. The program finished uploading, and the screens around them went dark. "We're in," Tessa said, a mix of relief and pride in her voice. Before they could celebrate, an alarm blared, and a voice crackled over the intercom. "Nice try, but you're not getting out of here alive." The room erupted into chaos as hunters poured in from every entrance. The pack fought fiercely, their movements a blur of strength and precision. Tessa ducked behind the control panel, her heart hammering as she tried to stay out of the line of fire. She could hear Logan's growls, Danny's sharp barks, and the shouts of the hunters as the battle raged around her. "Stay down!" Logan shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "I'm fine," Tessa called back, though her hands shook as she reached for the small stun device Lydia had given her. In the midst of the fight, Logan found her, his chest heaving and his eyes wild. "Tessa," he said, his voice softer now. She looked up at him, her fear and determination warring in her chest. "I'm not running," she said firmly. His expression softened, and for a moment the world seemed to fade away. "You're incredible," he said, his voice rough. "So are you," she replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. Their eyes met, and in that brief, stolen moment, the chaos around them didn't matter. The moment was shattered as Lydia shouted, "We've got what we need. Fall back." Logan nodded, grabbing Tessa's hand and pulling her toward the exit. The pack moved as one, retreating into the shadows as the hunters scrambled to regain control. Once they were safely outside the stronghold, Tessa leaned against a tree, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with equal parts disbelief and relief. Logan stepped closer, his amber eyes searching hers. "Because of you." She shook her head. "Because of us." As the pack regrouped, Lydia held up a file she'd grabbed during the mission. "There's something in here," she said, her voice heavy with significance. "The hunters aren't just after us. They're working with someone else, someone who wants more than just revenge." "What do you mean?" Logan asked, his tone sharp. Lydia opened the file, revealing a series of documents and photos. "They're planning to expose us," she said, "but they're also using us, experimenting on us. And whoever's funding this operation has bigger plans than we realized." The pack fell silent, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Logan clenched his fists, his voice low and steady. "We're not just fighting for our survival anymore. We're fighting for our future." Chapter 22. The air inside the stronghold was suffocating, heavy with the scent of fear and smoke. Tessa's pulse thundered in her ears as the pack regrouped in one of the control rooms, their earlier victory now feeling hollow. "We need to move," Logan said, his voice low and urgent. His amber eyes darted toward the door, every muscle in his body coiled for action. Danny clutched his side, blood seeping between his fingers. What gave it away? The alarm or the guys with guns? Lydia glared at him while tending to another injured pack member. "Now's not the time for jokes, Danny." Logan ignored them, his focus on Tessa. "Stay close. No heroics." She nodded, gripping the stun baton in her hand so tightly, her knuckles ached. They barely made it into the next corridor when the hunters struck. The ambush came fast and brutal. Hunters swarmed from side passages, their weapons gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. The pack fought valiantly, their claws and fangs flashing as they tore through their enemies, but the hunters were ready this time. One by one, members of the pack were overpowered, some dragged away by nets crackling with electric current, others felled by tranquilizer darts. "Logan!" Tessa screamed as he was tackled by two hunters, their blows calculated and brutal. He fought with a feral intensity, his wolf roaring just beneath the surface, but even he couldn't take on the sheer number of opponents. A sharp whistle echoed through the corridor, freezing everyone in place. The hunters parted, and their leader stepped forward. "Victor!" Tessa recognized him instantly from the photos they'd uncovered. A tall, lean man with cold, calculating eyes, and a smirk that made her skin crawl. "Well, well," Victor drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Logan Kane, the big bad alpha. Not so untouchable now, are you?" Logan snarled, his amber eyes blazing. "Victor." "Oh, good, you remember me," Victor said, feigning delight. "I wasn't sure, considering how long it's been since your pack slaughtered mine." Tessa's stomach twisted as Victor's words sank in. "That wasn't," Logan began, but Victor cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Don't bother with excuses," Victor snapped, his tone icy. "You killed my family, my friends, and for what? Territory? Power?" Logan's jaw tightened, guilt flickering in his eyes. "It wasn't like that." "No?" Victor said, his smirk returning. "Then explain it to me. Explain how your pack left me with nothing but ashes and a thirst for vengeance." The air between them crackled with tension, the weight of Logan's past pressing heavily on his shoulders. "Tessa!" Lydia's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. Tessa turned just in time to see another hunter aiming a dart gun at Logan. Without thinking, she lunged forward, swinging her stun baton with all her strength. The hunter went down, but her victory was short-lived. Two more hunters grabbed her, their grips bruising as they dragged her toward Victor. "Ah, and who is this?" Victor said, his eyes narrowing as he looked her over. "The little vlogger causing so much trouble." Tessa glared at him, her fear swallowed by a surge of defiance. "Let him go," she demanded. Victor chuckled. "Oh, you're feisty. I see why Logan likes you." Her cheeks burned, but she refused to back down. Victor leaned closer, his voice low and menacing. "Here's the deal, sweetheart. You surrender now, and maybe I'll let your precious Alpha live. Or you keep fighting, and I'll make sure you both regret it." "Tessa, don't," Logan growled, his voice filled with equal parts desperation and command. She looked at him, her heart breaking at the sight of him restrained and bloodied. "You don't get to decide that for me," she said softly, her voice trembling. Logan's eyes blazed with frustration. "I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself for me." "Logan, you'd do the same for any of us," she said, her voice steadier now. "That's what being part of the pack means." "Tessa?" His voice cracked, the weight of the moment crashing over them. Before she could answer, an alarm blared, and a monitor on the wall lit up. A countdown appeared, the numbers ticking down ominously. "What is that?" Tessa asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Victor smirked. That's the end of your little secret." The screen shifted, showing a live feed of various cities. Each one displayed a coordinated broadcast, the hunter's evidence of werewolves ready to go public. "In less than 10 minutes, Victor said, "the whole world will know what you are, and I'm betting they won't be too welcoming." The pack's collective gasp echoed through the corridor. Logan struggled against his restraints, his growl deep and feral. "You'll destroy more than just us, Victor. You'll destroy everything." "That's the idea," Victor said coldly. Tessa's mind raced as she took in the scene. The pack was overpowered, Logan was restrained, and the hunter's plan was already in motion. Then she saw it, a console on the far wall, its interface flickering faintly. "I can stop it," she thought, the realization hitting her like a bolt of lightning. But she'd have to act fast. "Victor," she said, her voice louder now, drawing his attention. "You think you're so smart, but you forgot one thing." Victor arched a brow, amused. "And what's that?" She smirked. "I'm really good at making things go viral." Before he could react, Tessa yanked a small smoke grenade from her pocket, one of the last-minute additions Danny had insisted she take, and hurled it at the ground. "Tessa, no!" Logan shouted, his voice raw. She ignored him, darting through the haze toward the console. Her fingers flew over the keys, her years of editing videos and troubleshooting tech now her greatest weapon. The countdown continued to tick down, the seconds slipping away faster than she could think. "Come on," she whispered, her heart pounding. "Come on." Victor's voice cut through the chaos. "Find her, stop her." Footsteps pounded behind her, but Tessa didn't stop. Her hands trembled as she input one final command, her eyes glued to the screen. A message flashed. "Upload disrupted, restart required." She exhaled a shaky breath, relief flooding her chest. But the victory was short-lived. A hunter tackled her from behind, sending her sprawling to the ground. She gasped as the impact knocked the wind out of her, her vision swimming. "Tessa!" Logan's voice roared, filled with fury and desperation. Victor appeared above her, his smirk darker than ever. "That was a nice try, but it won't save you." Before he could strike, a deafening growl erupted from the shadows. Logan, free from his restraints and fully shifted into his wolf form, launched himself at Victor. The two clashed in a brutal, visceral fight, their snarls echoing through the corridor. Tessa struggled to her feet, her body aching but her resolve unbroken. She grabbed a nearby piece of debris and swung it at the hunter who had tackled her, sending him reeling. "Get out of here," Logan growled, his voice a mix of human and wolf. "Not without you," she shot back, her eyes blazing. In the chaos, Lydia and Danny appeared, their injuries evident but their determination unshaken. "We've got your back," Danny said, grinning despite the blood on his face. "Let's end this," Lydia added, her tone fierce. As the pack regrouped, Tessa stumbled across a hidden room in the stronghold. Inside she found a strange device glowing faintly. A weapon, or perhaps something more. "What is this?" she murmured, her hand hovering over it. Logan appeared behind her, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Our last chance." Chapter 23. The hidden device glowed faintly in the dim room, its intricate design pulsing like a heartbeat. Tessa crouched beside it, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of the swirling patterns and strange inscriptions etched into its surface. "Any idea what this thing does?" Danny asked, leaning over her shoulder, his tone more nervous than casual for once. Not exactly," Tessa admitted, biting her lip, "but it's connected to their system. If I can figure out how to overload it—" Logan, standing guard by the door, growled low in his throat. "We don't have time for guesswork, Tessa." She shot him a look, her frustration bubbling over. "Guesswork is what's kept us alive this long, Logan. Trust me on this." His eyes locked on hers, the tension between them palpable. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. "Make it quick." Tessa's fingers flew over the keypad built into the device, her instincts guiding her more than any real understanding of the tech. Years of editing, chaotic video footage, and troubleshooting crashes had taught her one valuable lesson. When in doubt, improvise. "Talk to me, Tessa," Lydia said, standing beside Logan and scanning the room for any signs of hunters. "Almost there," Tessa muttered. She glanced up at the screen connected to the device, its readout displaying a dizzying array of numbers and symbols. Her vlog training kicked in as she imagined explaining the process to her followers. Step 1, don't panic. Step 2, mash buttons until something works. Step 3, save the day. The hunters' system suddenly flickered, the room's lights dimming as the device began to emit a high-pitched whine. "What did you do?" Danny asked, half impressed, half terrified. "Disabled their weapon, I think," Tessa said, her voice shaking slightly. "But it's not going to hold for long. We need to get out of here before—" The device let out a deafening crack, sparks flying as it overloaded. The room shook, throwing them all off balance. Logan caught Tessa before she could fall, his grip firm and protective. "You okay?" "I've been better," she admitted, her voice breathless. "You're insane," Danny said, grinning despite the chaos, "but I like it." The explosion of the device rippled through the stronghold, throwing the hunters into disarray. Shouts echoed through the corridors as the pack regrouped, their morale bolstered by the chaos. "Whatever you did, it's working," Lydia said, a rare smile breaking through her usually composed demeanor. Tessa turned to Logan, her heart pounding. "This is our chance. We have to take down Victor and end the—" Logan's jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with renewed determination. "Stay with me, all of you." As they moved deeper into the stronghold, the hunters' leader, Victor, awaited them in the main hall, flanked by armed guards. His cold smirk sent a chill down Tessa's spine. "Impressive," Victor drawled, his gaze flicking to Tessa. "You've caused quite the mess. I didn't expect you to be the one leading the charge." Tessa raised her chin, her fear overridden by defiance. "Underestimating me was your first mistake." Victor's eyes shifted to Logan. "And you? Always the noble alpha. How does it feel, knowing you've led your pack to ruin?" Logan stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "Not ruin, survival." Victor's smirk faded as Logan shifted into his wolf form, the air crackling with tension as the two squared off. The fight was brutal. Logan and Victor clashed with a ferocity that shook the room, their movements blurs of raw power and speed. The pack rallied behind their alpha, fighting off the hunters with renewed strength. Tessa stayed near the back, using her tech skills to keep the remaining systems offline. Her heart raced as she watched Logan struggle against Victor, each blow landing with bone-jarring force. "You've lost, Kane," Victor snarled, his voice venomous. Logan, bloodied but unyielding, bared his teeth. "Not today." With a final, devastating strike, Logan overpowered Victor, sending him crashing to the ground. The hunters began to falter, their confidence wavering as their leader fell. Danny, Lydia, and the rest of the pack pressed the advantage, forcing the hunters to retreat. But the victory came at a cost. Amid the chaos, one of the older pack members, Callum, stood his ground against an incoming wave of hunters, his fierce determination unshaken. "Go!" Callum shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "Callum, don't!" Lydia cried, but it was too late. Callum charged the hunters, his sacrifice buying the pack precious time to escape. Tessa's throat tightened as she watched him fall, his bravery a bittersweet reminder of what they were fighting for. The remaining hunters fled, their stronghold in ruins. The pack gathered outside, their breaths ragged and their expressions a mix of relief and grief. Logan, still in wolf form, shifted back and approached Tessa, his eyes searching hers. "You saved us," he said, his voice low and steady. She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "Not without a cost." Logan reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. Callum knew what he was doing. He believed in us, in you. Don't let his sacrifice be in vain. As the pack began to regroup and tend to their wounded, Tessa noticed a small device clutched in Victor's hand, discarded during the fight. She picked it up, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Logan asked, stepping beside her. Tessa examined the screen, her stomach sinking as a message appeared. Phase 2 initiated. She looked up at Logan, her fear mirrored in his eyes. This isn't over. The pack stared at the device, the weight of the cryptic warning settling heavily on their shoulders. Whatever Phase 2 was, it promised to be even more dangerous than anything they'd faced before. Chapter 24. The clearing was quieter than it had been in days. The smell of smoke still lingered faintly in the air, a ghost of the chaos they had survived. Tessa stood at the edge of the newly rebuilt fire pit, watching the flickering flames dance against the night sky. The pack had gathered in a loose circle, their voices low and subdued. They were mourning, but they were together, their unity stronger than it had ever been. "Here's to Callum," Danny said, raising a makeshift cup filled with moonshine Lydia had insisted they break out for the occasion. "The stubborn old wolf who always told me I wasn't pulling my weight, and probably wasn't wrong." Laughter rippled through the group, bittersweet but genuine. "To Callum," Lydia added, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "And to all the sacrifices that brought us here." The pack echoed her toast, their voices blending into a shared howl that sent shivers down Tessa's spine. Logan stepped forward, his presence commanding yet calm, the flames reflected in his amber eyes as he looked at the pack. "We've been through hell," he said, his voice low but steady. "We've lost more than we ever thought we could, but we're still standing, stronger, together." Tessa felt his gaze shift to her, and her heart skipped a beat as he continued. "And we've gained something too," he said. "Someone who proved to all of us that bravery doesn't come from claws or fangs, it comes from heart." Her cheeks burned as every eye turned toward her. "Tessa," Logan said, his tone softening, "you've risked everything for us. For me. You've earned your place here not because of what you've done, but because of who you are." He stepped closer, his gaze holding hers. "Welcome to the pack." The weight of his words settled over her and tears pricked at her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Danny broke the silence with a whoop. "About time!" Laughter erupted, easing the lingering tension. Later, as the pack began to disperse, Tessa found herself sitting on the same fallen log she'd used during their first strategy meeting. Logan joined her, his movements as fluid and graceful as ever. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. She looked at him, her lips curving into a small smile. "I think so, for the first time in a long time." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Tessa spoke again. "You know, when this all started, I didn't think I'd survive a week out here," she admitted, her tone light but reflective. "I was just a vlogger with a knack for DIY projects. Now I'm—" "A badass?" Logan offered, smirking. She laughed. "Maybe, but also someone who's finally figured out what matters." Logan reached for her hand, his touch warm and grounding. "And what's that?" She turned to him, her eyes soft but unwavering. "Family? Loyalty? And maybe even a stubborn, overprotective alpha who drives me crazy half the time. He grinned, his amber eyes glowing faintly. Only half the time? Don't push your luck, she teased, though her smile widened. As the fire burned low, Tessa felt a sense of peace she hadn't thought possible just days ago. The pack was laughing again, leaning on each other as they healed. Lydia and Danny argued playfully over the last piece of meat from the grill, while Kyle, even Kyle, offered her a nod of grudging respect. Logan squeezed her hand, drawing her attention back to him. "You've changed everything, you know," he said softly. "So have you," she replied. "For the better?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I think we make a pretty good team." Tessa's heart swelled as she closed the gap between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that was equal parts soft and electric. The next morning, the pack gathered to scout the edges of their territory. The sky was clear, the sun painting the forest in shades of gold and green. Logan stood beside Tessa as they watched Danny wrestle with a stubborn map, Lydia rolling her eyes nearby. "What now?" Tessa asked, her tone light but curious. Logan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his touch both protective and grounding. "We rebuild, we protect what's ours, and we stay ready for whatever comes next." Tessa nodded, her gaze drifting to the horizon. For the first time, the uncertainty didn't scare her. It excited her. As they turned to head back to the clearing, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. She paused, frowning. "What is it?" Logan asked, instantly alert. She shook her head, brushing it off. "Probably nothing." But as they walked away, a faint trail of footprints in the dirt caught the light. Too fresh, too human. Tessa leaned into Logan's side, her heart light despite the faint warning tingling at the edge of her thought. Whatever the future held, she knew they'd face it together. And for now, that was enough.